My name is Isaiah Allen, as you already know, and something was brought to my attention a little bit ago, and I haven't really dived deep in on it because so much other things have been popping off. But I've heard that the Jews controlled the slave trade. Now, if this is real, this is validating on so many different levels because I always felt like, why? I always felt like white people, like regular old whites from Europe, like regular Joe Schmo, like the Smiths and the O'Flanagans and all of them niggas, I always felt like they weren't, I wouldn't say smart enough to do the slave trade. I would just say, all right, let's just look at this. This is one of my bases for thinking that the slave trade couldn't have been affiliated with the white race exclusively. Now, this might come off as funny. I don't know what you're going to think about this, but this is the way I view it. All right. So,
20,
this is
24 people are now.
this right here is black people on a ship with white people officiating it. Now, this is my view on it. White people can't control blacks that well. You
Banned
need
from sailing with Carnival Cruise Line after getting into a
you
fight.
need a
The video
foreign
from Saturday
god.
appears to show a group of people
You
you see
need
in
a
here shoving each
foreign
other
god.
while disembarking a
Some
ship
sort
inside of a
of-
terminal in
some sort of
Galveston.
foreign
You can see
entity,
people
if
being
you
pushed
might,
to the ground.
to keep
In a
these
statement to
niggas in
NBC
line.
News,
Do you know how hard it is to get niggas to act right inside of an enclosed space? I never ever thought, I was like, how did these white people get this many Negroes? Get this many people to like
Protecting affordable health care that families rely on.
Oh, and we fixed this also. We don't have to go through this. Watch. Give me
Vote
3
Melissa
seconds.
Bean. Find your polling place
As a
now.
matter of fact, let's just go to the thing now. As a matter of fact, because I got tired of that. We got premium now. So, Caribbean cruise fights. Yeah, but this is just one of my reasons why I don't think that white people could have controlled. Look at this. Can you
Only
imagine?
on Fox 11.
Can you imagine you being in the middle of the fucking Atlantic and like 6 mandingos just like, fuck it, we're not doing this no more. You need some esoteric fucking spell to keep these niggas in line. And I don't think the O'Flanagans were able to do it. So when I heard that the whites didn't really run the slave trade, it made me want to go digging. So, without longer ado, we're going to start poking around and trying to figure out who was involved inside of the slave trade. I got a lot of different videos we could watch. I'm not going to try to bore you. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch a few short videos and see if we can get some answers on some things that we can search. My goal is to make this more of a digging type of thing instead of just taking what we get in just taking what we get at face value. Oh, well, they have books on this. Okay. All right. Well, let's just start with something short. Well, you know what? Let's go. Let's just dive neck deep. Let's go neck deep. I got my blunts rolled.
Mark.
Let's go. All right. So it says the role of Jews in the slave trade. Cancel that out.
Brown will have a long-term.
Here again.
Of any kind, Jewish related, Israel related, Hebrew related, Messianic prophecy related, Jewish background to New Testament related, it is conspiracy theories against the Jews related. Any question like that, by all means, give me a call. And I, in particular, invite those who differ, those who have different perspectives, those who believe I'm wrong about is truth. Okay, some good news, and then we're going to get into a very serious and eye-opening topic. Last week on the broadcast, quite unexpectedly, my guest Scott Volk said, "Hey, listen, I'm hundreds of thousands of
so
questions."
it looks like he's
sir, over the
changed.
years. But go ahead.
It looks like he's changed clothes. I don't know, brother. We're gonna have to find something better than that.
Southern people. He, meaning the president, remarked
Okay, bet. This looks
and
informative.
wants to create a new nation. He says, what is advisable?
Robert May's Southern Jews expansion.
Hi, I'm Robert May, a professor emeritus at Purdue University. And
Oh, nice. Shout out Purdue University. Purdue just got done beating Michigan today, plus like 500 on the slip. Crazy work. Purdue always really produces really well in basketball.
Pleased to be with you today, presenting to the Civil War Roundtable Congress. And I want to start a few months after Abraham Lincoln's election as president in January of 1861. I want to start with the U.S. Senator from Florida, Senator David Levy Yulee. And David Yulee sends word to state authorities back in Florida that he favors secession from the Union and wants to create a nation.
So
he says, what is advisable is the earliest possible
okay. Sorry. My shit, for some reason, when it plays,
new nation.
It'll
He
stop
says,
playing the sound. I really want to get this guy's name.
Of 1861. I want to start with the U.S. Senator from Florida, Senator David Levy Yulee. David Yulee sends word to state authorities back in Florida that he favors secession from the Union and wants to create a new nation. He says, what is advisable is the earliest possible organization of a Southern Confederacy and of a Southern Army. The North is rapidly consolidating against us. A strong government and a strong army with Jeff Davis for general-in-chief will bring them to a reasonable sense of the gravity of the crisis.
Okay. So we got a little bit of information right here. One of the first individuals from Florida, David Yulee Levy is misspelling of David Levy Yulee, with a prominent 19th century American politician and businessman who was the first person of Jewish heritage to serve in the United States Senate. Okay. Served as a delegate for Florida Territory and later became Florida's first senator upon its admission to the Union in 1850. Okay, cool. So he says that there's a letter out there from this individual. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have the letter. Okay, so it says David Yulee is most famous for a treasonable letter he wrote on January 5th, 1861 regarding Florida's secession, often misspelled as secede from the Union. While still serving as U.S. Senator, Yulee wrote to Joseph Flanagan, a member of the Florida Sovereignty Convention. The letter was later discovered by the Union forces on Amelia Island and published in Harper's Weekly. So we could go read it if you guys want, but I honestly don't want to. Yeah, let's see that. All right, so AI is going to give us a transcript. Transcript, please, because we're nice. Transcript, please. Give us a transcript. Okay, where is the letter? Okay, so the letter, I guess this is the letter. Bam. So we have the letter. Like I said, Yuli's letter. All right, let's just listen to the old white dude talk about it. Let's listen to it because we just want to prove that the letter's real. The thing is we want to take every single thing that people are saying and we want to run it through research in order to see if this shit is real. We don't want to just take niggas' word for shit. I used to follow a guy. He was in my apartment complex. His name was Adam. Smart, super smart dude. And the reason he was smart wasn't because he knew the answer. The reason he was smart was because he always preached, think for yourself. Speak for yourself. Yourself, not for anybody else. So if we find information that is equivalent or that is important to us, and we can do research and prove that it's real, then we can start to speak for ourselves by using that information. So I just want to say shout out Adam Mason, dude, real fucking stand up man. Like real talk, like bro, like when I was coming over there, I was like what, in high school, running around trying to be lost, bro. He would be like, "Oh yeah, for real? So you think that that's what that is?" And he would ask me these questions, and it wasn't even like he was trying to doubt me. It was like he was trying to influence my thoughts. So I want to say big shout out to Adam Mason. Amazing dude, man. Real stand up ass fucking dude. All right, let's get this back.
General in chief will bring them to a reasonable sense of the gravity.
All right, let's listen to the freaking letter because I don't know when it starts. All right,
with the U.S. Senator from Florida, Senator David Levy Yulee. And David Yulee sends word to state authorities back in Florida that he favors secession from the Union and wants to create a new nation. He says, "What is advisable is the earliest possible organization of a Southern Confederacy and of a Southern Army. The North is rapidly consolidating against us. A strong government and a strong army with Jeff Davis for general-in-chief will bring them to a reasonable sense of the gravity of the crisis. I shall give the enemy a verbal shot next week before I retire from Congress. I say enemy. Yes, I am theirs, and they are mine." So he's a fanatic.
So this individual, the first Jewish senator, is literally coming out and saying that he is an enemy of the states and that he thinks that Florida should secede from the states.
Or at least in January of 1861, ready for the Confederacy. And why do I bring up this relatively forgotten man whom I'm guessing most viewers today have never heard of? Well, partly because he is one of the most politically influential Jewish Southern extremists before the American Civil War. Now, he was born in St. Thomas, what was then the Danish Virgin Islands.
Okay, so he was born in St. Thomas. Just pocket that for a second. If you look at the screen, this is the letter that the dude was reading from. View image metadata. Yeah. So this is his letter to the guy about seceding.
Florida's founding fathers. He was a planter. He was a speculator. He was a railroad entrepreneur. He was also Florida's territorial, he served in Florida's territorial legislature, and then he became Florida's territorial delegate to the United States Congress. And he was a delegate to the Florida Constitutional Convention, and he served two terms in the United States.
This is the man, David Yulee. I'm not going to say anything. If you want to look on your screen and see David Yulee, this is him.
So here's Senator David Yulee. And you might be a little misled by his name, which doesn't sound particularly Jewish. He was born David Levy.
David Levy Yulee. Levy, you remember we were talking about it inside of one of my previous videos. Are the Jews really Jews? Moses was a what? He was a Levite. So as you progress through history, you don't want to be called Levi Oh yeah, you just end up being Levy as a different enunciation.
Grew up in a Jewish home in Norfolk, Virginia, where he had been sent by his father to come of age. So he grows up in the home of a Jewish merchant in Norfolk by the name of Moses Myers. But he apparently had to compromise his faith to get married. He wanted to marry the daughter of the former governor of Kentucky.
And I just want you guys to know that I wasn't tweaking. In the context of names like David, Levy, Yulee, Levy is not short for a longer word. It is a complete surname of Hebrew origin, meaning joined or attached. Levy versus Levy. While these are spelled the same, they have different origins. The name Levy, derived from the biblical tribe of Levi, it is a very common Jewish surname and also interchangeable with the spelling of Levi. You see? I'm not tweaking, bro. I'm not racist and I'm not tweaking.
And Governor Wycliffe, and her name was Nancy Wycliffe. And shortly before his marriage, he had his name officially changed by the Florida legislature to David Yulee instead of Levy. And at any rate, he gets his name changed, becomes a Presbyterian. And ironically, this was months after Florida's government had decided to name a county in his honor, Levy County, Florida. Well, at any rate, that's just an introduction to David Yulee. Now, what intrigues me is Yulee's interest in getting Cuba annexed to the U.S. as a new slave state. In December of 1845, he introduces a resolution as U.S. Senator from Florida into the Congress, asked President Polk to negotiate Cuba's purchase with Spain, which then owned Cuba. It was not an independent nation. It was a Spanish colony. And it was a colony with a very intense system of slave labor, which, other than the United States, was only present in a few places in the Western Hemisphere by then. It had been eradicated everywhere else. Brazil's the most notorious other case. But at any rate, Yulee introduces a resolution to Congress asking President James Polk to initiate negotiations with Spain to buy Cuba. He withdraws it a few days later, saying he's doing this in deference to the wishes of several of his friends, but he's only doing so, quote, for the present.
Okay, so I went and I plugged in, did David Yulee ask to buy Cuba for slaves? We're running everything. Everything that these niggas tell us, we're going to run. And then we're going to find the truth and we're going to go from there. Bang. Yes, David Yulee was a prominent advocate for the annexation of Cuba to expand the number of slave states in the Union. During this time in the U.S. Senate, Yulee introduced bills twice to annex or purchase Cuba from Spain. His motives were both political and economic. Expansion of slavery. Yulee believed that without expanding the number of slaveholding territories, southern states would lose political power and become static. And the guy just said he was a planter. As a wealthy planter who owned 1,000 enslaved people on his sugar plantations, he saw Cuba, already a major slave-based sugar producer, as a natural extension of the slave economy.
He's indicating that he plans to push for the annexation of this slave island to the United States in the future. And a few years later, in July of 1849, he sends a letter to the leading Southern radical politician John C. Calhoun, saying that the South could safely stay in the Union if Texas was subdivided and Cuba were added to the Union. He said this would put the South in a position to check any such increase in the free states as would settle their preponderance in the government. Well, what's he referring to? Well, he's writing this letter in 1849. And if you look over the situation at that time, which hadn't really changed since 1846 very much, except for land added by the Mexican War, which we'll get to later. But at any rate, if you look at this map, you'll see the light blue states are free states in the Union. These pinkish, or whatever you would call this color, states down here were slave states. Now, what about the future? What would be likely to happen in the future? Well, you might know about the Missouri Compromise line, which had been drawn as part of the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And if you look here, this even lighter pinkish area down here was dedicated to slavery. That is, at the time, it was U.S. territory. But if it was to become a state in the future, or if it would become an official U.S. territory, it would be slave territory. Above this, you have a purplish area that's been dedicated to freedom. So if you look at the Louisiana Purchase, everything is going to be free except for the small area down here. Sooner or later, the North is going to outnumber the South in the number of states. And in fact, because we get land from Mexico as part of the U.S.-Mexican War, in 1850, California, which is off the map to the left, will become a free state. And for the first time, the North is going to have the most states. So the future looks pretty dim. But what Yulia is saying is, if you get Cuba added to the Union, and some people were talking about adding it as more than one state, and then you subdivide Texas, because part of the Texas annexation deal back in 1845 was that if Texas wanted to be a bunch of smaller states, instead of one big state, it could be 5 smaller states. Anyway, Yulia is saying we can still stay in the Union if we get a bunch of new slave states, and as part of this package, we need to get Cuba. Now, I'm not only fascinated by his interest in adding Cuba to the Union as a slave state, but that he's willing to do it by what was known as filibustering. Now, today, we think of filibustering as talking a bill to death, or blocking it through Senate procedures, which is an issue in Congress as I give this talk. Will the rules be changed? But before the Civil War, the term filibuster meant something entirely different. It meant groups of people setting out from their own country to invade other countries by private military expeditions without the permission of their own government. This was known as filibustering, and the United States was known as the greatest filibustering nation on earth. In fact,
and we're checking what he says in real time, bro. He's not talking out of his ass. It says David Levy wanted to filibuster Cuba. Yes, David Levy, who often went by David Levy during this period, was a vigorous advocate for the annexation of Cuba and was linked to secretive, often illegal filibustering expeditions. Legal efforts to buy Cuba. Well, support of filibustering. Look, he's going to explain it to you. He's not lying.
The United States had filibusters in progress virtually all the time, either in the planning stage or out in the field, between the U.S.-Mexican War and the Civil War. Now, filibustering was against the law. You can't have a private army at will deciding to invade a foreign country. You might start a war with that country for your own country. It might get you involved with a third party that might want to enter the war. You could have a very large-scale war if you don't watch out. So filibustering was against international law. And it was also against a U.S. statute passed in 1818 known as the Neutrality Act, which said that if you either planned or invaded a foreign country on your own as part of a private military expedition, you could be thrown in jail for 3 years and you could be fined $3,000, which, of course, today would be a sizable sum because of the multiplied inflation since Civil War times. At any rate, despite these penalties, America addicted to filibustering between the U.S.-Mexican War and the U.S. Civil War. Now, there were expeditions and plots, especially against Mexico, but also against Cuba, and also against other countries, particularly Nicaragua. Many hundreds of Americans landed in Cuba as part of filibuster expeditions in 1850 and 1851 with a Venezuelan native and ex-Spanish official in Cuba by the name of Narciso Lopez. And they actually landed on Cuban soil trying to overthrow Spanish rule there in 1850 and 1851. Several thousands of Americans were involved in various expeditions to Central America in the 1850s under an adventurer by the name of William Walker, a native Tennessean who went out to Gold Rush, California, and then got involved in filibustering. He first invaded Mexico, then he made a bunch of expeditions down to Nicaragua. One of the leading filibusters of the time was the former governor of Mississippi, John Quitman. And John Quitman spent a couple of years in the mid-1850s planning an expedition to invade Cuba. The expedition involved newspaper editors, the originator of the phrase manifest destiny, the governor of Alabama. Quitman himself not only had been a leading Mexican war general, but even he was ex-governor of Mississippi, so on. Well, at any rate, filibustering is very important during this period. It seeps into American popular culture so that you've got sheet music, novels, poetry all about the filibusters. There were plays in theaters, stage plays about filibustering and so on. This will give you a bit of a feel for filibustering. Narciso Lopez, head of the Cuban filibusters in 1850 and 1851, was finally captured by the Spanish and garroted to death in Havana in 1851, September of 1851. Other filibusters were shot by firing squad, which is what this picture shows. After they were captured, William Walker, the leading U.S. filibuster who conquered Nicaragua for a while in 1855 to 1856 and got booted out in 1857. This is John Quibben.
All right, so the way that this filibuster shit works, and I know he's just throwing this word around, and I know he explained it, but briefly. So filibustering was essentially freelance imperialism. It followed a specific pattern of operation. So first, it would be privately financed. Expeditions were funded by private individuals, often wealthy Southerners who wanted to expand the territory available for slavery. So like our David Levy, or the Finnegan guy that he sent the letters to and stuff like that. Recruitment and training. Obviously, you need soldiers. Next, to avoid the Neutrality Act of 1818, which we were just talking about, which prohibited Americans from making war on countries at peace with the United States, these groups often departed in secret or under the guise of immigrant groups. Seizing control, once they landed, they would capture a key town or region and declare it an independent region and then petition for annexation. Expectation of local support. Most filibusters like Lopez in Cuba incorrectly assumed that the local population was oppressed and would rise up and join them as they soon landed. Why the name changed? The word comes from Vujbuta. In 1851, it became known as the Political Medical Foreign Congress. So we got our filibusters right there. U.S.-Mexican
War hero who plotted to conquer Cuba. Here's a playbill of a play in New York City, Nicaragua, or General Walker's Victories, just to cover it all. And I've covered this whole movement in my book, Manifest Destiny's Underworld. So the important thing is this U.S. Senator from Florida of Jewish extraction, David Yulee, wants the U.S. to get Cuba. He then decides to support the filibusters. And in May of 1850, during the first Lopez expedition to Cuba, the U.S. Navy tries to stop it. The Taylor administration, Zachary Taylor was Louisiana's slave owner.
Is this the first time Americans had to stop the Jews from doing some shit they weren't supposed to do? Did we just stumble upon some shit? President Taylor interaction with David Levy? Hold on, let's look this up. President Taylor interaction with David Levy, USS Navy. Let's see what's going on. In 18, Jack B. Taylor took a firm stance against the very filibustering expeditions that David Levy supported, even deploying the U.S. Navy to stop them. Taylor's proclamation, despite being a Southern slaveholder himself, he was a strong Unionist. In 1849, he used a stern proclamation warning that anyone participating in illegal use of the Navy. To back up his threat, Taylor ordered the Navy to blockade the ports of Round Island, Mississippi, and New Orleans to prevent Narciso Lopez's forces from departing for Cuba. Navy ships successfully broke up Yulee's response. David Yulee was outraged by Taylor's use of federal power. He and other fire eaters viewed the Navy's intervention as unconstitutional overreach that actively hindered the expansion of the South's destiny and economic system. So they've been trying to take shit for a while. Okay, cool.
Plantation owner, but he did believe in upholding the law. And his Secretary of the Navy, during this first Lopez expedition to Cuba in May of 1850, Secretary of the Navy writes Captain of the U.S. Navy, Josiah Tatnall, commanding the war steamer Saranac, he sends him to Havana Harbor, basically to stop the filibusters. And these are the official orders from the Taylor administration to this U.S. naval commander. And it says, should you ascertain that such hostile movement is on foot and is proceeding against Cuba, you will use all proper means in your power to prevent a landing. Should the expedition have effected a landing and a revolution in Cuba be in progress, you will prevent the landing of any reinforcements or arms. In other words, the Taylor administration wants the Navy to stop the expedition, do anything possible to prevent its success.
Nice.
Our slavery
We
expansion
used to be a good country.
happy U.S. Senator David Yulee.
Well, I really want to show you guys, because black people are so fucking, niggas be trying to act so victim-y. Shut the fuck up. We owned more slaves than the white people that you look around and you see. We owned a lot of slaves. I want to show that, but I don't know where I would be able to get that information. It was hard enough stumbling upon this information. This shit got 52 likes. What? How many views? 2,000 views. Like, this shit gets suppressed. Like, niggas don't see this shit. You guys probably aren't even gonna see this shit. I don't even know who I'm talking to right now. You niggas won't see this shit.
Is not happy with press reports that the Taylor administration is trying to prevent a U.S. conquest of Cuba. He introduces a resolution into the Senate. The Senate look into all this, and he says that Taylor is wrongly construing the U.S. Neutrality Act against filibustering. He says that this act should only apply in American waters. We should prevent Americans from leaving U.S. soil, but we don't have any right in foreign waters to apply the act. He said that by doing this, the administration was interfering with the traditional right of emigration. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can emigrate wherever you want. You shouldn't be prevented by your own government from moving to a foreign country. Further, if a revolution broke out in Cuba against Spanish rule because of this landing, for the U.S. government to interfere militarily would be to take sides in a revolution. And yet our own country was born in revolution. We believed in revolution. What right? We should stay neutral. He said that, this is Senator Yulee again, that President Taylor was trying to, quote, crush a movement conceived in the spirit of liberty. Now, let's pause. What does all this lead to? What questions does it raise? Well, it makes me wonder, first of all, is Senator Yulee speaking only for himself? Second of all, is he speaking for other Southerners of Jewish background? And third of all, if he's representative of other Southerners of Jewish background, do we learn anything worth remembering about the role of Jews in the Old South? Because the South, as a region of America, has had a long history of anti-Semitism in the Ku Klux Klan and in other forms. Some of you might be familiar with the famous Leo Frank hanging and execution in Georgia. I don't want to get into all that, but it does raise some very interesting questions. So let's start with the issue, was Senator Yulee the only politically prominent antebellum Southern Jew or quasi-Jew? Were there others who were famous politically, and yet were of Jewish background? And the truth is, in 1861, there were approximately 20,000 to 25,000 Jews in the 11 states that formed the Confederacy. Now, there were a number of Jews who had been politically active by that time. One of them, for instance, was a grocer named Isaac Marks in Orleans Parish in Louisiana.
Hold on. So if you go look at this story on Leo Frank, it says was a Jewish American factory superintendent in Atlanta whose conviction and subsequent lynching for the murder of 13-year-old Mary Flanagan became Mary Fagan became one of the most notorious examples of anti-Semitism in U.S. history. They wanted to blame it on a black dude, but they blamed it on a Jew. Said Frank was convicted in August 1913, largely based on the testimony of Jim Conley, a black janitor who most modern histories believe was actually the killer. The trial took place in a highly hostile anti-Semitic atmosphere, with mobs outside the courthouse calling for Frank's death. Oh, they got pictures. Yeah, they got pictures. I don't have anything to say on this. R.I.P. Leo Frank. They drove to his hometown of Marietta and hung him from an oak tree. Wow. This case right here literally started the This started the Anti-Defamation League. And then in 1915, after this, the Ku Klux Klan started. In 1986, the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles granted Frank a posthumous pardon, acknowledging the state's failure to protect him, though it did not officially address his guilt or innocence. Huh. The more you know. Let's go back a little bit, because I don't think I heard what he said.
Prominent antebellum Southern Jew or quasi-Jew. Were there others who were famous politically, and yet were of Jewish background? And the truth is, in 1861, there were approximately 20,000 to 25,000 Jews in the 11 states that formed the Confederacy.
21,000 Jews in the states that formed the Confederacy in 1861?
Now, there were a number of Jews who had been politically active by that time. One of them, for instance, was a grocer named Isaac Marks in Orleans Parish in Louisiana, who became a delegate to the Louisiana Secession Convention in 1861. But there were only two Jews besides Yulee, only two Southern Jews, who I believe were truly prominent on the national political stage. One of them you may have heard about because he became the most well-known and most highly regarded of the Confederate Secretaries of State, Judah P. Benjamin. Now, like Yulee, Judah P. Benjamin was a Sephardic Jew. Now, what do we mean by Sephardic Jews? If you look at Europe, they had two different branches of the Jewish faith. There were Eastern European Jews who tended to be more dark-skinned, and they were known as the Ashkenazi Jews. The more fair-skinned Jews generally were the Sephardic Jews of Spain and Portugal. Some of them wound up in North Africa, migrated to North Africa. Others, and you have to remember that there was the big expulsion as part.
All right, so we just looked up how many Jews. Bro, this nigga, he's 10 for 10 so far. I'm not want to tell a nigga that he's a liar when he's not lying. You hear me? And I just want to run this shit so niggas don't feel like they out here lying. I'm putting this shit inside of the AI shit, and the AI telling us. The AI is telling us this shit. We're not coming up with this shit. He's not telling us this shit. There's nobody that can say we're secretly KKK members. We're looking this up on AI. There's no rabbi that's going to come out and say that I should go and live with the Palestinians. So let's rewind a little bit and go back to what it was, because I want to make sure that we stay focused. You know what I mean? But
regarded of the Confederate Secretaries of State, Judah P. Benjamin. Now, like Yulee, Judah P. Benjamin was a Sephardic Jew. Now, what do we mean by Sephardic Jews? If you look at Europe, they had two different branches of the Jewish faith. There were Eastern European Jews who tended to be more dark-skinned, and they were known as the Ashkenazi Jews. The more fair-skinned Jews generally were the Sephardic Jews of Spain and Portugal. Some of them wound up in North Africa, migrated to North Africa. Others, and you have to remember that there was the big expulsion as part of the Spanish Inquisition, and they had to go somewhere. So some of them wind up going to the Americas. And Judah Benjamin is descended, and so is Yulee, from Sephardic Jews who went to the Americas. So here's Judah Benjamin. His family moved to the United States. He was born on St. Croix in the Danish Virgin Islands, but the family moved to the United States in 1813, settled eventually in Charleston, and his parents ran a fruit stand on King Street in Charleston. He got the patronage of a prominent Jewish merchant who supported him, sent him off to Yale. Judah Benjamin, after his education, and he didn't graduate from Yale, but he goes down to New Orleans and he learns French, which you almost had to know to get ahead in Louisiana, which was bicultural, even more so then than it is today. And at any rate, he learned French. He was admitted to the bar. Very successful lawyer. In fact, he was admitted to the bar of the U.S. Supreme Court to practice before it. Co-authored a legal digest with a man named Thomas Slidell. You're probably not familiar with Thomas Slidell, but you probably are familiar with Thomas Slidell's brother, John Slidell, became a Louisiana U.S. Senator, and later became an important Civil War figure because he was the Confederacy's appointee as minister to the court of Emperor Louis Napoleon in France. And Benjamin formed a close association with his fellow U.S. Senator John Slidell of Louisiana. They were close allies in politics. At any rate,
bro, I just put his name, bro. I just literally just put his name in Google Gemini. I was letting White Boy talk. I was letting Gemini load up the shit they was trying to say, bro. Bro. All right. Judah P. Benjamin was perhaps the most complex and influential figure in the Confederate government. Often called the brains of the Confederacy, he was the right-hand man to Jefferson Davis and the first Jewish person to hold a cabinet-level position in North America. He was a wealthy slave owner operating Bellachassi sugar plantation with 140 enslaved people. He was a U.S. senator. He was a consigliere for the Confederacy, acting as a lightning rod for criticism that was actually intended for the president, a secret secretary of war for them. He was secretary of state for them. As Richmond fell, this bitch ass nigga ran. As Richmond fell, Benjamin fled, fearing he would be tried for treason or linked to the Lincoln assassination. He was one of the niggas that assassinated Lincoln? Hold on. Hold the fuck on, bro. Judah P. Benjamin killed Lincoln? What the fuck? Nah, bro. This the shit you only get here. Like, share, and subscribe. A Jewish nigga killed a Jewish nigga put money on Abraham Lincoln head. Don't fucking play with me, bro. No. But he was the most high-profile figures of accused of being the mastermind behind the assassination. The theory that the Confederate government was responsible for Lincoln's death was a major focus of the Union's investigation in 1865. Here's a breakdown of the facts. Do y'all want to hear this? I don't know. Maybe he'll talk about it.
Benjamin had a very quick political rise in Louisiana once he became a lawyer. He was elected to the Louisiana House of Representatives in 1842. He served in both Louisiana state constitutional conventions, 1844 to 1845, and then in 1852. He was elected to the Louisiana State Senate in 1852, and he was elected to the U.S. Senate to fill a vacancy shortly afterwards. He was never a member of a synagogue, but he did, unlike Yulee, identify himself fairly consistently as a Jew, and he was recognized as a Jew by other Southerners, including some Southerners who had anti-Semitic stereotypes. Verena Davis, the wife of the Confederate president, wrote memoirs after the Civil War, and she mentions Benjamin, and she says his type was decidedly Hebrew. He had a very interesting marriage story. He married a Catholic of French extraction by Natalie St. Martin. He married her when she was very young. She was only 16. He was 21.
Freaky ass
Purchased
nigga.
a plantation for them that I showed on the previous slide. I'll go back to it, but kind of a traditional Southern plantation with columns, very large. And at any rate, she finds plantation life dull, goes to France in 1845, taking with her their only child, and he winds up supporting the two of them the rest of his life.
Oh, this freaky motherfucking bro, she was getting piped down in France. In France, nigga was hitting her ass, getting her wet, moist, pussy wet, just dripping. He over there, hey babe, did you get the money? Did you get the money for the? She over there, book open. You hear me? Legs spread, leg up. You hear me? Leg in the air like that on the dead homies, bro. She freaky as a mug. You hear me? He freaky for freaking with her. He freaky as a bitch. It's just a bunch of freaky ass motherfuckers.
Visiting Paris to see them. And once they leave, Benjamin has his own mother move in with him at Bellechasse, a plant.
Then this nigga get his mama to move in with him.
And he never remarries.
Freaky,
okay, so
lonely
you've got
ass
two
nigga.
very nationally prominent Southern Jews, David Yulee and Judah Benjamin. The third prominent Southern Jew is more traditionally Jewish, Phillips. He's born in Charleston, from an immigrant German father and an American-born mother, studies law like the other two had, develops a successful practice, becomes secretary of Charleston's Reformed Society of Israelites. So he's more of a self-conscious Jew. Marries a 16-year-old woman named Eugenia Levy of Charleston. They have 9 children. And they move eventually to Mobile, Alabama, where he spends most of his antebellum years. He was a lawyer for the Bank of Mobile, published a digest of the decisions of the Alabama Supreme Court. Has quite a political career, serves in the state legislature. He's delegate to the 1852 Democratic National Convention. He was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1853, stayed in Washington even after his congressional service was over in 1855, and he's still there at the start of the Civil War when his wife does some spying for the...
Oh, she ugly as a bitch. Who's she spying for? That bitch, she must have been spying on some tigers. That bitch look like a tiger in the face. Looking motherfucker. She ugly as hell. See, this the reason why I felt so bad for them black men, because they said that them white women was raping them.
Confederates.
Look at her face.
The Union. Mary Chestnut, the most famous Southern diarist probably of all time, and wrote her famous Diary from Dixie, as it's sometimes called, that was later published. Mary Chestnut found Phillips's wife a bit of a flirt. She wrote in her diary in March 1861, the month after Jefferson Davis became president of the new Confederacy. She writes in her diary, "I wish Mr. Mallory," referring to Jefferson Davis, the Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Mallory, "I wish Mr. Mallory would not tell me so much of his flirtation with Mrs. Phillips. I do not think it as innocent as he pretends, but it is none of my business." Now, Phillips is extremely influential in national politics for one particular act that you may not associate him with, but he played a key role in it. And I'm talking about the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which, as much as anything, brought on the Civil War because it was a key turning point in the whole North-South dispute over slavery. Now, we all know that Stephen Douglas was the man most responsible for this very controversial law. Most of us know that the law was controversial because it more or less got rid of the old Missouri Compromise line that I showed you in the previous slide that divided the Louisiana Purchase. As long as it divided the Louisiana Purchase, there weren't going to be any debates over slavery in the rest of the territory that had been acquired from France in 1803, as there had been over Missouri's admission to the Union in 1819, because it would be predetermined. Territories that became states below the line would likely be slave states because they were promised to slavery so long as they were territories, so slavery would become entrenched. Above the line, they were promised to freedom, so freedom would become entrenched. So at any rate, Stephen Douglas gets rid of that line. Why does he do it? Well, he wants to get a transcontinental railroad built across the northern part of that Louisiana Purchase territory that up till then hadn't been organized into separate territories or states. Well, what Southerners object to is letting Douglas organize the territory formally because that'll open it up to building the railroad. And that means that all these more people will move west. You'll get people in these territories and you'll get more and more free states. So they don't want to go along with Douglas's organizing of this area to build the railroad. So they get a deal from him in which basically he'll erase the Missouri Compromise line, which means that slavery will be free to go into, presumably, area above the Missouri Compromise line. How do you word this exactly? The more harshly you word it will offend the North. If you say, I'm just repealing the Missouri Compromise, it was seen as a deal with the South that the North had agreed to. And so repealing it, revoking it would really anger Northerners. Well, at any rate, Douglas was trying to figure out how to do this to get Southern support without alienating Northerners. And along with Kentucky U.S. Senator John Breckinridge, later a Confederate general, Douglas seeks out Phillips for advice because Phillips had worked on Alabama's legal digest, and he was known as a very well-regarded lawyer. And Phillips uses his ability to split hairs and make the wording of the Kansas-Nebraska Act more agreeable to the North, even though it's getting rid of a line, keeping slavery out of most of the Louisiana Purchase. This is explained in William Freeling's great book, The Road to Disunion, Volume 1. And in this book, he gives the Southern Jew the spotlight. He says, not since the cotton gin had the Patent Office observed a Southern invention as faithful as Phillips's phraseology that the Compromise of 1821 while not repealed, should be declared inoperative and void in Kansas, Nebraska. So you're not repealing the Missouri Compromise. You're just calling it inoperative and void. Well, at any rate, let's move on. The key thing is we're talking about Southern interest in expanding slavery southward and the role of key Southern Jews in this movement. So where do Judah, Benjamin, Phillips, the other two leading Southern Jews before the Civil War, stand on issues like Cuba and filibustering? Do they join Yulee in supporting the acquisition of a slave Cuba and, if necessary, filibustering expeditions to Cuba to get it? Well, you might assume that Judah Benjamin was anti-filibustering because he was actually one of the U.S. government lawyers in prosecuting the Narciso Lopez filibusters in 1850 and 1851. But that was earlier. At any rate, let me quote you from what he says in the trial. One of Lopez's co-filibusters, a former U.S. senator from Mississippi, John Henderson, is put on trial first, and Benjamin becomes U.S. attorney to prosecute Henderson, earning a $5,000 fee for doing it, which may well explain why he's anti-filibustering in this particular case. And Benjamin says, and his remarks as U.S. attorney are quoted in the biography of Benjamin by Eli Evans. And Benjamin says, not a single movement has been made in Cuba. Not a ripple disturbs the smooth current of the life of that people. Not a single proof is given of their disaffection with their lot, meaning Spanish rule. The rich are busily engaging in rolling their sugar cane, gathering in their rich crops. The poor are eating tortillas, smoking cigars, swinging in hammocks, and sucking oranges. They do not appear to be troubled by their oppression or disturbed by their lot. Their independence is to be achieved for them by our young men who rejoice in the outlandish name of filibuster. So Benjamin sounds like he's anti-filibuster and maybe anti-Cuba, but I think in this particular instance, he simply was earning the $5,000 fee. I think, in fact, we can implicate both Judah and Benjamin and Phillips in the crime of supporting filibustering to end Spanish rule and add it to the South as slave states. We might call them, in fact, advisors to John Quitman's Cuba filibuster terrorist cell in 1854. Let's set the scene. It's 1854. For years, Spain has been under British pressure, and keep in mind this is 3 years after after Benjamin had been involved in prosecuting filibusters. So this is later. At any rate, Britain had been pressuring Spain for years to end the African slave trade to Cuba and to end slavery in Cuba. Rumors start flying across the South in 1854 that Spain is going to finally bow to British pressure, that it's going to get rid of slavery in Cuba. Spanish authorities at this time proclaim all illegally imported slaves from Africa free. They called them emancipados. Now, of course, the African slave trade had been banned for some time, the international trade, and Spain had agreed to oppose the African slave trade. But nonetheless, slavery was so profitable in Cuba that many slaves, thousands and thousands, have been imported into Cuba over the years. Now Spain's saying, oh, you're emancipated. The slaves are free if you've been illegally brought in recent years. So they do that. The Captain General, the Spanish authority in Cuba, starts a registry to determine what Cuban slaves really deserve their freedom. The Captain General starts recruiting free blacks already in Cuba for Spain's occupation forces. So you're arming black soldiers in Cuba. And then in addition, they have an ongoing policy to bring in Chinese contract laborers who really would have lived pretty much like slaves, but the idea was replace black slaves with technically free Chinese laborers, or coolie laborers as they were called. Now, Southerners find out what's going on in Cuba, and they see a horrific threat to their future in America and to slavery's future in America. Cuba is near the Gulf Coast. Wouldn't Southern slaves eventually find out that Cuba was ending slavery? Wouldn't they get the idea that their slavery should end, their enslavement should end? Wouldn't enslaved black Southerners revolt for their own freedom? Now, when Southerners start talking about this plot in the mid-1850s, they use the phrase that Spain intends to Africanize Cuba. And you can see this clipping here, Progress of the Africanization Scheme in Cuba. This is a dispatch from Havana, February 8th, 1854, that appears in the New York Times. Well, the former governor of Mississippi, John Quitman, is one of the Southerners most worried about the Africanization scheme in Cuba, the supposed Africanization scheme. He owns 3 plantations. He begins assembling men, ships, and arms for an invasion of Cuba. His idea is we'll do a preemptive strike. We'll seize the before Spain can fully implement its policies to emancipate the slaves. Because once the slaves are emancipated, number one, they might oppose our landing. Number two, they certainly they'd have a legal claim to freedom, and we don't want that. We want to move in quickly with a preemptive strike, stop Spain from implementing its emancipation policies, and its plans to arm slaves to stop a U.S. invasion. Let's just get in there quickly. Then, once we've conquered the island, thrown out the Spanish military, we're going to proclaim Cuba an independent republic. Now, you might wonder, why don't they just annex it right away? Well, if they're declared an independent republic, it means that, like the Republic of Texas, for an interim period, they can make their own laws. They can get rid of all the Spanish laws, freeing slaves formally, and all the protection, all the rules undermining slavery that Spain had passed over the years. And then once slavery is secure in Cuba, like Texas, which had a decade of freedom before it became annexed to the Union as an independent republic, then we'll ask Congress to admit us as a slave state. And because you're being admitted by Congress by joint resolution like Texas was, that means we're taking you with your own rules. You're not going to go through a territorial phase as a U.S. territory. Congress makes the rules for territories. Congress can ban slavery in territories. You bypass that danger. So that's what Quitman had in mind. Now, he probably wouldn't have started this plot had he not expected the new U.S. president to support him, unlike Taylor, who, remember, opposed Cuban filibustering. Well, who's the new U.S. president? He is a New Englander, Franklin Pierce, but he had been a general in the Mexican War, and he was known to favor U.S. territorial expansion. In his inaugural address, Franklin Pierce had announced that he wouldn't shy away from territorial expansion. You can't imagine a U.S. president today. Say President Biden had said, I intend the United States to take over other countries. I mean, it's absurd. It would endanger the U.S. diplomacy, might get us involved in wars. Franklin Pierce actually announced in his inaugural address that the U.S. would be expanding into new countries. He appoints pro-filibustering men to his cabinet and diplomatic positions. He appoints as the U.S. minister to Portugal a man who had been twice arrested in the U.S. for supporting the Lopez filibusters years earlier. At any rate, Quitman expects President Pierce to support him. Instead, Pierce shocks Quitman and his supporters by issuing an anti-filibustering proclamation in Taylor's spirit. It's dated May 31st, 1854. It says that the Pierce administration will not fail to prosecute with due energy any U.S. citizens disobeying our neutrality law and invading Cuba. Now, 2 letters that I found in the Quitman papers at Harvard University expose the fact that both these other 2 Southern Jews, Philip Phillips and Judah Benjamin, were connected with the Quitman filibuster conspiracy. Phillips was obviously a key mediating figure between the filibusters, Quitman and his followers, and President Pierce. That is to say, he was a go-between, trying to get Pierce to reverse his declaration against filibustering and get Pierce to support an invasion of Cuba. How do I know this? Well, Joseph Lecesny writes Quitman on June 8th, 1854, about a week after the President Pierce's proclamation. He writes to Quitman from Mobile, Alabama. So this is an Alabama lawyer named Lecesny writing to Quitman from Mobile. And he writes, our representative in Congress, remember Phillips was representing Alabama, our representative in Congress, Colonel Phillips, is here in Mobile on a short visit during the recess taken by the 2 houses at Washington. He is reported to be specially favored with executive confidence, meaning he's a confidant of President Pierce. And I was therefore particularly anxious to learn the true sentiment which dictated the president's recent proclamation against Americans participating in filibustering expeditions. I infer from the general tone of Phillips's conversation that is probably the last we shall hear from the president on the subject, unless our friends are extremely imprudent and needlessly public in their movements. In other words, if Quitman plans his expedition privately, doesn't get written up in headlines, Pierce will leave him alone. That way, as long as he doesn't embarrass Pierce by being too public. And then the letter goes on. Am I saying to the president that the proclamation had been received with disfavor and if followed by any practical measure of prevention would render General Pierce the most odious man alive to the Southern people? He, meaning the president, remarked significantly that perhaps the president didn't mean any more than General Jackson did by his own proclamation against the volunteers in Texas, that is, Americans who basically filibustered Texas to help get Texas its independence. The president, if the president spoke sincerely, I infer he knows the fact if Phillips, he's talking about Phillips, if Phillips spoke sincerely, I infer that he knows the fact that the president will not willingly see anything we do and really wishes us success. So Phillips had gotten word from Pierce back to the filibusters. Basically, Pierce won't take action against them so long as they don't get in the headlines. Now, similarly, Judah Benjamin was a filibuster consultant. A Louisiana planter named Samuel Walker wrote Quitman the very next month, in July of 1854. He's writing from New York City, explaining why, except for Judah Benjamin and Slidell, his cohort, politicians in Washington don't get why you can't just buy Cuba, why you have to conquer with a filibuster expedition first. But but Benjamin gets it, Walker says in this letter. So this is what Walker writes. I took passage for Washington. During my travels, I heard little or nothing on the matter which interests the South so deeply. Whenever I did mention Cuba, I found the question was misunderstood. I tell you, the Pierce administration trembles before filibusterism. The word spoken in their offices puts them on nettles, but they still pretend it will be bought. I told them buying it was the worst thing that could be done for the South, and the very thing we did not desire, that we would make her independent in spite of the administration's desire to buy it. Mr. Slidell is with Mr. Benjamin, the only men who understand the matter. Now, we know that Judah Benjamin is worried about the Africanization of Cuba from a speech he gave 3 months earlier in the U.S. Senate on May 1st, discussing a motion in Congress to suspend the neutrality law so that filibustering to Cuba can be temporarily legal. Benjamin says, I concur that the existence of a scheme for the Africanization of Cuba and for the establishment of a Negro state nominally independent, and yet under the virtual protectorate of England, France, and Spain has been conclusively established by the evidence that has been placed before the Senate. I deem it the duty of this government, the U.S., promptly to oppose the carrying out of a policy so fraught with danger to our southern constituencies. In other words, if we don't get rid of the Neutrality Act so that the filibusters can go into Cuba, England, France, and Spain will protect Spanish rule of Cuba and making Cuba a Negro state there. That's what he's saying. 5 years later, in 1859, Benjamin speaks out again on Cuba, not only endorsing a bill to offer Spain $30 million to buy Cuba, but also making it clear that he believes in the necessity of Cuba having slavery and that this is important for the South. Benjamin wants to buy Cuba for $30 million, and he talks about Cuba as an intertropical island whose external commerce reaches nearly $80 million, lies at our door. The first leading fact, which ought to be kept constantly in view, is that the wealth and productivity of this island have been created, and their continuance can only be secured by a system of compulsory labor. If the experience...
I'm so pissed off because, bro, like, if you're listening to this story right now, like, if you're actually listening to the story, there's 3 Jewish dudes in the background trying to take over Cuba because Cuba is about to get freed, and they don't want to have a free state next to a bunch of slave places because a word might come back up to the slave places that they're free. And bro, and then the verbiage they're using talking about Africanized, like they don't want to, like, come on, man. And I'm not saying this are all Jews down there, but you got 3 really rich Jews down there doing that.
Mankind has solved a single industrial problem. We may fairly assume as granted that tropical productions can be maintained on a scale to meet the requirements of civilized man by compulsory labor alone, meaning slavery. The fruits of the southern states, of the Spanish islands of Cuba and Puerto Rico, and of the Brazilian Empire immeasurably exceed in value similar products of other states and countries of this hemisphere of like soil and climate cultivated by free labor. Now, there's scattered evidence that other southern Jews were involved in filibustering. The Jewish merchant in New Orleans, Isaac Marks, publicly collected funds for the Lopez expedition. If you read Bertram Wallace Korn's book, Early Jews of New Orleans, you find out that Meyer Cohn, a lawyer and public figure, he was a member of the New Orleans Law Association and so on, he presided over a mass meeting in 1851 to protest the execution of Lopez and the other filibusters by Spanish authorities after their failed landing in Cuba. And there were probably some Southern Jews who participated in actual filibustering. If you look at that's Judah Benjamin's speech in the Senate for Cuba in 1859, if you look at this book about Walker's expedition to Nicaragua by William Wells, published in 1856, Wells had been involved in the movement. Wells talks about a private named Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R, who was wounded at a key battle in Nicaragua that Walker's army fought. Apparently survived because the New York Daily Tribune in 1857, enlisting Walker survivors who made it back from Nicaragua to Boston on the U.S. sloop of war Cyane, at any rate, it listed a John Mayer as one of the survivors. So that correlates. And then I find out later on that there was a Natchez, Mississippi Jew named John Mayer who organized the local home guard during the Civil War and actually played a role in firing on Union forces landing at Natchez during the Civil War, which led to a short battle, the only time Natchez came under fire in the Civil War. And certainly Edwin Moyse, who was U.S. District Attorney in Eastern District of Louisiana, seems to have been pro-filibuster. He's a U.S. District Attorney, and the government wants him to stop. The U.S. government wants him to stop the Quitman plot against Cuba. And what he basically does is, in a couple of letters back to the State Department, he just kind of poo-poos the idea that Quitman could even be planning to invade Cuba. He writes U.S. Secretary of State William Marcy in December of 1853, "I acknowledge receipt of your letters in relation to rumors of an expedition against Cuba. These rumors have their origin at the North and are not credited here." In other words, we don't believe them here in New Orleans. So finally, is there any significance that these various Jews, and especially the three most significant Jews in the whole nation and before the Civil War, that they had links to slavery expansion and to filibustering? Well, I want you to consider the thesis, rather surprising one, given the history of anti-Semitism in the South in the last 150 years or so. I want you to consider the surprising thesis of Robert Rosen, who wrote a book called The Jewish Confederates. Rosen takes note of the following. He notes that the first constitution in American history giving Jews religious freedom was actually a Southern constitution. It was issued by the proprietors of the Carolina colony in 1669. It was called the Fundamental Constitutions. And who wrote a book called The Jewish Confederates. Rosen takes note of the following. He notes that the first constitution in American history giving Jews religious freedom was actually a Southern constitution. It was issued by the proprietors of the Carolina colony in 1669. It was called the Fundamental Constitutions. And it offered religious freedom to, quote, "ye heathens, Jews, and other dissenters." Rosen also notes that David Yulee and Judah Benjamin were the first U.S. senators in history of Jewish descent. So the first Jewish senator did not come from New York City, as you might guess. He was a Southern Jew. Points out that Judah Benjamin's likeness is on the Confederate $2 bill. Apparently, Judah Benjamin is the only Jewish American ever on a piece of U.S. currency.
What?
And he's on
and he was a slavery defender.
Confederate bill. He argues that Southern Jews adjusted to Southern racial mores before the Civil War. A small percentage of them acquired slaves of their own. More importantly, no prominent Southern Jew ever attacked slavery, became an abolitionist. And apparently, most Southern Jews were willing to fight for slavery and the Confederacy in the Civil War. Private Eugene Levy of New Orleans in October of 1864, this is towards the end of the war, he objects to proposals that the Confederates were floating to free male slaves and put them in the Confederate Army. If they'll fight for the Confederacy, get us independent, we'll let you have your freedom at the end of the war. Private Levy of New Orleans is very worried. He says the principle that slaves are in their proper sphere as they are at present situated within the boundaries of the Confederacy is one of the grand incentives to the waging of war against the United States. So, knowing this, you can guess Rosen's incredible thesis, totally unexpected to me before I read the book. Antebellum Southern Jewry experienced a freedom unknown to Jews anywhere else in the world. They had been accepted by their fellow citizens of the Old South, more accepted as Jews than at any other time since the golden age of Jewry in medieval Spain. I would argue that Jewish involvement in filibustering and the movement for slavery expansion before the Civil War validates Rosen's thesis that Southern Jews became so assimilated into Southern institutions that they wanted them protected and extended. Now, there were a few incidents of anti-Semitism in the Confederacy. Judah Benjamin was derided as being a Semite by some Jew-hating Southerners. I think the stresses of the Civil War, the inflation, the hoarding that went on, the lack of supplies, starvation in some areas, I think it turned people to looking for scapegoats, and they found Jewish merchants easy scapegoats to make for their own misery. But that's another story. At any rate, what I hope you've done is first learn something about.
That was very interesting. I guess we'll dive more in tomorrow, or I might as well just record another one.